Last fall, I jumped into a freezing river in the Appalachian Mountains to save what I thought was a drowning child. When I pulled it out of the water, I realized it wasn't a child at all. It was a small Bigfoot, maybe 3 feet tall, covered in dark fur and barely breathing. I should have left it there. Should have walked away and pretended I never saw it. At least this is what I told myself for a while. But I didn't. I carried that creature back to my camp, wrapped it in my sleeping bag, and tried to keep it alive. That single decision, choosing to save something that shouldn't exist, turned my peaceful hunting trip into a nightmare. I never believed in Bigfoot. Not once in my entire life. Growing up in the city, the whole idea seemed like something out of a bad movie or one of those late-night cable shows my uncle used to watch. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. It was all nonsense as far as I was concerned. Just stories people told around campfires to scare each other or get attention online. I was the kind of person who rolled his eyes at those grainy photos and shaky videos that pop up on social media every few months. Blurry shapes in the distance that could be anything from a bear standing on its hind legs to a guy in a costume. I'd seen enough of those to last a lifetime, and none of them had ever convinced me. That was my thinking until last fall when I took what was supposed to be a simple 5-day hunting trip to the Appalachian Mountains. I'd been planning it for months, saving up vacation days, organizing my gear, studying maps of the backcountry. It was going to be my reset button, a chance to disconnect from everything that was wearing me down and remember what it felt like to be truly free. What happened out there changed everything I thought I knew about the world. I saved something from drowning in a river, and because of that, I ended up being hunted myself. Not by an animal, by other men who saw dollar signs instead of a living creature that deserved compassion. And I'm lucky to be alive to tell you about it. I'd been working 60-hour weeks at a job that was slowly grinding me down. The noise, the traffic, the constant pressure, it was all too much. I needed to get away from it all, clear my head, remember what it felt like to breathe clean air. So I packed up my gear, threw everything in the truck, and headed east to the mountains. The plan was simple: 5 days alone in the wilderness. No phones, no internet, no people. Just me, the forest, and hopefully a decent buck or two. I'd done trips like this before, but something about this one felt different from the start. Maybe it was just my state of mind, or maybe some part of me knew what was coming. Either way, I drove those winding mountain roads with a strange mix of excitement and unease. When I finally reached my spot, a clearing deep in the forest where I'd camped before, it was late afternoon. The sun was filtering through the trees in those long golden beams that make everything look like a painting. I set up my tent, got my camp organized, and spent the rest of the evening just sitting by the fire, listening to the sound of the forest, owls hooting in the distance, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the occasional crack of a branch. It was exactly what I needed. That first night, I slept better than I had in months. The next morning started off perfect. I woke up with the sun, made coffee over the fire, and headed out to check some areas I wanted to scout for the next few days. The forest was alive with bird calls and the smell of pine and damp earth. I spent most of the day just walking, getting my bearings, setting up a few trail markers so I wouldn't get lost. This was wild country. The kind of place where you could walk for hours and not see another human being. That was the whole point. By late afternoon, I was maybe 2 miles from camp, following a game trail that ran parallel to a river. The river had been swollen from recent rains. You could hear it from a quarter mile away, this constant rushing roar that never stopped. I'd crossed smaller streams earlier in the day, but this was different. This was serious water, moving fast, churning white over rocks and fallen logs. I made a mental note to stay away from it. One wrong step and you'd be swept downstream before you could even think about grabbing onto something. I was heading back toward camp when I heard it. At first, I thought it was just the river. The sound of water hitting rocks can play tricks on your ears. But then I heard it again, clearer this time. A cry, high-pitched, desperate, almost human, but not quite. It cut through the roar of the water like a knife. Every instinct I had screamed at me to investigate. Maybe it was a hiker's kid who'd gotten separated from a group. Maybe someone had fallen in and was calling for help. I didn't think, I just ran toward the sound. I broke through the trees and hit the riverbank at a full sprint. The water was even more violent than it sounded, a churning brown mass full of debris moving like a freight train. And there, maybe 20 yards downstream, I saw something small being tossed in the current. My first thought was that it was a child. The size was about right, maybe 3 feet tall, and it looked like it was wearing some kind of dark clothing. The thing was struggling, arms flailing, head going under, and then popping back up. It wasn't going to last much longer. I didn't stop to think. I kicked off my boots, dropped my rifle, and dove in. The cold hit me like a hammer. That river was snowmelt, probably 40 degrees, and it knocked the breath right out of my lungs. The current grabbed me immediately, and I was fighting just to keep my head above water. I'm a decent swimmer, always have been, but this was different. This was like being in a washing machine. I could see the small figure ahead of me going under again, and I swam harder than I've ever swam in my life. When I finally reached it, I grabbed what I thought was a jacket. But the second my hand closed around it, I knew something was wrong. The texture was all wrong, rough, coarse, almost like animal fur. And it was attached to skin, not cloth. The thing twisted in the water, and I got my first real look at it. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. This wasn't a child. This wasn't human at all. The creature was covered head to toe in dark brown fur, matted and soaked. Its face was somewhere between human and ape, a flattened nose, prominent brow ridge, eyes that were wide with terror but somehow intelligent. Its arms were longer than they should be, its hands bigger. And it was heavy, way heavier than a human child that size should be. I'd guess maybe 80 or 90 pounds packed into that 3-foot frame. But even in my shock, I didn't let go. It was drowning, and I'd already committed to saving it. The next few minutes were pure survival. I had one arm wrapped around the creature and the other trying to swim toward the bank. The current kept pulling us downstream, slamming us into rocks, dragging us under. My lungs were burning, my muscles were screaming, and the cold was starting to make everything fuzzy. I remember thinking this was it. I was going to drown in this godforsaken river trying to save something that shouldn't even exist. Then my hand hit something solid, a fallen tree, half submerged, stretching out into the river. I grabbed onto it with everything I had left and pulled us both toward it. The creature wasn't fighting anymore. It had gone limp in my arms, which made it even harder to hold on to. I hooked my leg over a branch, got a better grip, and started pulling us hand over hand toward the shore. It felt like it took forever. My fingers were so cold I couldn't feel them anymore. But finally, I felt mud under my feet. I dragged both of us up onto the bank and collapsed. For a long time, I just lay there, gasping, shaking, trying to remember how to breathe. The creature was beside me, not moving. I thought maybe it was dead. Then it coughed, water spraying from its mouth, and its chest started rising and falling. We were both alive, somehow. When I finally had enough strength to sit up, I got my first real look at what I'd pulled out of that river. The creature was sprawled on its back, unconscious, water still dripping from its fur. In the fading light, I could see every detail. It was young, I was sure of that. Something about its proportions, the softness of its features, suggested it was an infant or juvenile. Its fur was thick and dark, almost black when wet, covering every inch of its body except for the palms of its hands and the soles of its feet. Those were lighter, almost pink. Its face was the most unsettling part. It had human qualities, the shape of the skull, the way the eyes were positioned, even the little nose, but it also had distinctly non-human features. The brow ridge was pronounced, the jaw was heavier, and there was a flatness to the face that you'd never see on a person. And the hands, they were massive compared to the body. The fingers were thick, strong-looking, with these broad fingernails that looked almost like a person's, but darker, tougher. I checked it for injuries, running my hands along its limbs, feeling for broken bones or deep cuts. There were scrapes and bruises all over, probably from being bashed against rocks in the river, but nothing seemed broken. Its breathing was shallow but steady. I knew I should leave it there. Just walk away, pretend this never happened, get back to my normal life. But I couldn't do it. I'd risk my life to save this thing. I couldn't just abandon it now. The problem was the weight. This little creature was incredibly heavy, like its bones were made of lead. I managed to get it up into a fireman's carry, draped across my shoulders, but every step was a struggle. My legs were already weak from the cold and exhaustion, and now I was hauling 90 pounds of unconscious Bigfoot through the forest. It took me over an hour to make it back to camp, and by the time I got there, I was ready to collapse again. I laid the creature down near my fire pit and got the flames going as fast as I could. Both of us were soaked to the bone and shivering. I grabbed my spare sleeping bag, the nice down one I'd brought as a backup, and wrapped it around the small Bigfoot. It didn't stir. I changed into dry clothes, then sat down and just stared at it, trying to process what had happened. A Bigfoot, a real, actual Bigfoot, or Sasquatch, or whatever the hell you wanted to call it. It was lying unconscious 5 feet from me, wrapped in my sleeping bag, breathing softly. Part of me still couldn't believe it was real. I kept expecting to wake up and find out this was all some kind of fever dream brought on by hypothermia. But every time I looked over, it was still there. Solid, real, impossible. I spent the next few hours alternating between feeding the fire and watching the creature. As it warmed up, its fur started to dry, and I could see it was actually more of a dark reddish brown than true black. Its chest rose and fell steadily. A few times it made small sounds, little whimpers or grunts, but it didn't wake up. I thought about my options. I could try to contact someone, but who? The authorities would want to take it away, study it, probably lock it up somewhere. Scientists would descend on this place like locusts, and what would happen to the creature then? Nothing good, I was certain of that. By the time night fell completely, I'd made my decision. I'd wait until morning. If the creature woke up and seemed healthy, I'd let it go back into the forest. If it didn't wake up or seemed hurt, I'd figure out what to do then. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all I had. I added more wood to the fire, made sure the sleeping bag was tucked around the small Bigfoot, and tried to get some rest. Sleep came in fits and starts. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that churning river, felt the cold water, remembered the weight of the creature in my arms. I woke up to find 2 eyes staring at me from across the fire. The small Bigfoot was sitting up, the sleeping bag still draped around its shoulders like a cloak, watching me with an expression I can only describe as cautious curiosity. Its eyes were dark brown, almost black, and there was an intelligence in them that made my skin prickle. This wasn't an animal, not in the way we usually think of animals anyway. There was something there. Awareness, consciousness, understanding. I could see it processing, thinking, trying to figure out if I was safe or dangerous. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. I didn't move, didn't want to spook it. My heart was pounding, but I kept my breathing slow and steady. The morning light was filtering through the trees, casting everything in shades of gold and green. The fire had burned down to embers, and there was a chill in the air that made my breath visible. The creature shifted slightly, adjusting the sleeping bag around itself, and I noticed its hands again. Those broad, strong fingers with their dark nails, so human and yet so different. Then slowly it made a sound, a soft vocalization that was somewhere between a hum and a grunt. Not aggressive, just communicative, like it was trying to tell me something, or maybe asking a question. I found myself responding without thinking, keeping my voice low and calm, saying things like, "It's okay," and "You're safe," even though I had no idea if it could understand me. But something in the way it tilted its head, in the way its expression softened slightly, made me think maybe it did understand. Not the words, but the intent behind them, the tone. I reached slowly for my pack, moving with exaggerated care, and pulled out some jerky and dried berries. My supplies were limited. I'd only packed for 5 days, and I was already on day 2, but I couldn't let this creature go hungry. I held the food out, hand extended, palm up, the same way you'd offer a treat to a nervous dog. The creature watched my hand, then looked at my face, then back at the food. Its nostrils flared slightly, taking in the scent. After a long moment, it reached out, those big hands moving carefully, almost delicately, and took the jerky from my palm. Its touch was surprisingly gentle. It sniffed the jerky thoroughly, turning it over in its hands, examining it from every angle. Then it took a small, cautious bite. Its eyes widened slightly. Surprise? Pleasure? I couldn't tell. But it ate the rest quickly after that, then reached for the berries. Those disappeared even faster. When it was done, it made that sound again, and I realized it was still hungry. Of course it was. It had nearly drowned. Been unconscious for hours, probably hadn't eaten in who knows how long before that. I gave it more food, emptying half my supply without really thinking about it. It ate everything I offered, and I could see it gaining strength with each bite. The shivering stopped. Its posture became more alert. By the time it finished eating, it looked almost healthy, still exhausted, still wary, but no longer on the edge of collapse. When there was no more food, it settled back down, still watching me, but the wariness in its eyes had lessened. Some invisible barrier between us had been crossed. Over the next few hours, we developed a strange kind of understanding. The creature stayed close to camp, never venturing more than 20 or 30 feet away. It moved differently than a human would. There was a fluidity to its motion, a natural grace that came from muscles built for both trees and ground. A few times I saw it pause and sniff the air, its whole body going still, like it was trying to catch a scent. Other times it would look toward the deep forest, its head cocked at an angle, like it was listening for something or someone. I wondered if it had been separated from its family during some accident. If somewhere out there, something bigger was looking for it, frantic with worry. Around mid-morning, I heard voices, human voices, coming through the trees. My heart jumped into my throat. I'd been so focused on the creature that I'd completely forgotten there might be other people in these woods. I knew there was another hunting camp about a mile south. I'd seen their vehicles at the trailhead when I came in, but I'd hoped they'd stay in their area and I'd stay in mine. I moved fast, ushering the small Bigfoot toward my tent. It seemed to sense the urgency and didn't resist, crawling inside and huddling in the corner. I zipped the tent shut just as 3 men emerged from the tree line. They were all in their 40s or 50s, dressed in hunting gear, carrying rifles. They looked friendly enough. One of them even waved as they approached. They introduced themselves, said they were from the camp down the way, asked if I'd had any luck hunting. I tried to act normal, but my mind was racing. The tent was right there, maybe 10 feet away. If the creature made any sound, if it moved wrong, they'd see the tent shift. I kept my answers short, tried to seem friendly but not too inviting. Just another hunter enjoying some solitude. But I must have looked nervous because one of them, the oldest one, with gray stubble and sharp eyes, kept glancing at me with this look of suspicion. Then he nodded toward the tent and asked what I had in there. I said, just my gear, nothing special. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Said he thought he'd seen the tent move. Before I could stop him, he walked over and unzipped the tent. I saw his whole body go rigid. Then he stepped back and his face had gone white. The other two moved closer, looking inside, and I watched their expressions change from curiosity to shock to something that looked like greed. The small Bigfoot was crouched in the corner of the tent, trying to make itself as small as possible. Its eyes were wide with fear. The three hunters just stood there, staring for what felt like an eternity. Then the gray-haired one let out a low whistle and turned to me. He wanted to know where I'd found it. I told them about the river, about pulling it out of the water. I could see their minds working, see them processing what this meant. Then the conversation shifted. One of them started talking about how much money something like this would be worth, about the fame, the proof, the fact that they could be the ones to prove Bigfoot existed. Another one was already pulling out his phone, trying to get a signal, talking about who they could call. The third was just staring at the creature like it was a winning lottery ticket. I told them no, flat out. I'd saved this thing's life. It was just a baby and it was scared, and I wasn't going to let them parade it around or sell it or whatever they had in mind. I was going to wait until it was ready, then let it go back into the woods where it belonged. They looked at me like I'd lost my mind. The gray-haired one said I couldn't just keep this to myself. This was too big, too important. Humanity deserved to know. I stood my ground. Said it wasn't happening. The mood shifted then, got hostile. They started saying things like, we all found it together, and finders keepers, and you can't stop three of us. I realized I was outnumbered, outgunned, and in serious trouble. They spread out, flanking me, moving like they'd done this before. And that's when I knew, if I didn't get out of there with the creature, I'd lose it, or worse. They were distracted, arguing among themselves about what to do first. That was my window. I lunged for the tent, grabbed the small Bigfoot. It wrapped its arms around my neck immediately and took off running. Behind me, I heard shouting, the sound of them scrambling for their weapons. I didn't look back, I just ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches whipping my face, the creature clinging to me like its life depended on it. Which it did. I could hear the hunters behind me, their voices getting louder as they gave chase. I'd grabbed my knife and water bottle, but that was it. Everything else, my tent, my supplies, my rifle, was back at camp. I was running blind into the wilderness with 90 pounds of Bigfoot on my back and 3 angry men with guns behind me. The first hour was pure adrenaline. I ran until my lungs were on fire, until my legs felt like they were going to give out, until I couldn't hear the hunters anymore. Then I found a thick stand of evergreens and collapsed inside them, gasping. The small Bigfoot climbed off me and sat nearby, watching the direction we'd come from. It was making that humming sound again, softer now, and I realized it was scared. So was I. They found us again by mid-afternoon. I heard them calling to each other, coordinating, moving through the forest like they knew what they were doing. These weren't amateurs. They hunted these woods regularly, knew the terrain. I'd just been here a day. The only advantage I had was that I was lighter than them and desperate. I picked up the creature and started moving again, trying to stay quiet, trying to cover my tracks. The small Bigfoot seemed to understand we were in danger. It stayed silent, holding on to me without complaint, even though I knew it had to be exhausted. We moved through the forest like ghosts, or tried to anyway. But they had numbers and resources. Every time I thought I'd lost them, I'd hear a shout or see movement through the trees. Night fell, and I thought maybe that would give us an advantage. But they had flashlights, and they kept searching. I could see the beams cutting through the darkness, sweeping back and forth. I found a huge fallen log, and we crawled underneath it, pressed into the dirt, barely breathing as they walked past. So close I could have reached out and touched their boots. When they were gone, I allowed myself to breathe again. The small Bigfoot was trembling against me. I realized it had stayed completely still the entire time, not making a single sound. It understood. On some level, this creature understood that its survival depended on silence. That thought scared me more than anything else that had happened, because it meant this thing, whatever it was smart. Really smart. By the third day, I was running on fumes. I'd barely slept, maybe grabbed an hour here or there in snatches that didn't feel like real rest. My body was starting to break down, muscles screaming with every step, joints aching from carrying the creature, a persistent headache from dehydration and stress. I'd barely eaten, rationing what little food I had left because I had to share it with the small Bigfoot. The creature wasn't doing much better. It was moving slower, its steps less sure, struggling to keep up when I had to set it down and make it walk. Its eyes were heavy-lidded with exhaustion. But it never complained, never made sounds that might give away our position. It understood the danger we were in. I'd been trying to put distance between us and the hunters, moving generally north through increasingly rough terrain. My strategy was simple: head toward the more remote areas where they might be less willing to follow. But they were relentless. Every time I thought we were clear, that we'd finally lost them, I'd hear a shout in the distance or spot movement through the trees. They were hunting us with the same determination they'd bring to tracking a trophy buck. Maybe more, because we weren't just a trophy. We were proof, fame, money, everything they'd probably dreamed about but never had. I found a small cave behind a waterfall around noon on that third day. It was cramped and damp, water dripping from the ceiling, cold seeping up from the stone floor. But it was hidden. You'd have to know it was there to find it. We crawled inside, and I finally allowed myself to rest, my back against the cold rock, the small Bigfoot pressed against my side for warmth. I split my last energy bar with the creature. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely unwrap it. It ate its half slowly, methodically, watching me with those intelligent eyes. I wondered what it was thinking, if it knew I was trying to save it. If it understood that I was all that stood between it and those men who wanted to cage it, study it, turn it into a sideshow. I must have dozed off because I woke to the sound of voices right outside the waterfall. They were so close I could hear individual words. One of them was saying something about checking behind the falls. My heart stopped. I looked at the small Bigfoot and put my finger to my lips in the universal gesture for silence. It nodded, actually nodded, that same understanding in its eyes, and pressed itself against the back of the cave, making itself as small as possible. Its fur blended with the shadows. If you didn't know it was there, you might not see it. We sat there in the darkness, the sound of the waterfall masking our breathing, listening to them search the area just feet away. I could see their shadows through the falling water, could hear their boots on rock. One of them came right up to the waterfall, so close I could have reached through and touched him. My hand was on my knife, ready to fight if it came to that, knowing I'd lose, but unwilling to go down without trying. The The small Bigfoot was trembling against me, but it didn't make a sound, not a whimper, not a breath loud enough to hear over the water. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, they moved on. I heard their voices fade into the distance, heard them calling to each other as they spread out to search other areas. We'd gotten lucky, again, but I knew our luck wouldn't hold forever. These guys weren't giving up. The creature was worth too much to them. Fame, money, attention. It represented everything they'd probably never have otherwise. And I was just some guy standing in their way. I started to realize they'd do whatever it took to get what they wanted, including getting rid of me permanently. On the fourth day, everything got worse. I heard new voices joining the others. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Dogs. They'd called in someone with tracking dogs. I could hear them baying in the distance, and I knew we were in serious trouble. You can hide from men, you can cover your tracks, throw them off your trail. But dogs were different. They'd follow our scent no matter what I did. I picked up the small Bigfoot and started moving faster. We had to put distance between us and those dogs, had to find somewhere they couldn't follow. The creature seemed to sense the new danger. It held on to me tighter, made small, distressed sounds. I tried to reassure it, but I was terrified myself. The baying was getting louder. They were gaining on us. I spotted a ravine ahead, steep sides, rocky, with a small stream at the bottom. It was our best chance. If we could get across, maybe the water would throw off the scent. I started down, half climbing, half sliding, trying not to drop the creature. Loose rocks gave way under my feet. The small Bigfoot was struggling too, its hands and feet not quite able to find good holds on the steep terrain. We were maybe halfway down when it happened. A rock gave way under the creature's foot and it slipped, nearly falling. I grabbed for it, caught its arm, but the motion threw me off balance. We both went sliding down the ravine in a shower of dirt and stones. I managed to twist, so I took the worst of it, my back slamming into rocks, branches tearing at my clothes. The creature tumbled beside me. We hit the bottom hard. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Everything hurt. Then I heard the dogs again, closer now, and I forced myself to move. The small Bigfoot was already on its feet, looking back up the ravine. I grabbed it and we splashed through the stream, then started climbing the other side. My hands were bleeding, my back screaming in pain, but I didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Behind us, I heard the hunters reach the top of the ravine, heard them shouting directions to each other. We made it up the other side of the ravine, but I knew we'd only bought ourselves minutes. The dogs would cross eventually, the hunters would follow. And I was at the end of my rope. My legs felt like they were made of lead. My vision was starting to blur at the edges. I couldn't run anymore. Couldn't think straight. Everything was starting to blur together. Exhaustion, pain, fear, desperation. I stumbled through the trees, the creature in my arms, until I couldn't go any farther. My body just gave out. I found myself on a rocky outcrop, surrounded by trees on 3 sides and a steep drop on the 4th. It was a dead end, a trap, the worst possible place to make a stand. I set the small Bigfoot down. My arms were shaking so bad I nearly dropped it, and we both stood there, catching our breath, waiting for the inevitable. The creature looked up at me, and there was something in its eyes that looked almost like understanding, like it knew this was the end, like it was grateful I'd tried, even though we'd failed. The hunters emerged from the trees a few minutes later, all 4 of them now, the original 3 plus the guy with the dogs, who were straining at their leashes, barking and snarling at us. The men were sweating, breathing hard, but there was triumph in their eyes. They'd won. They knew it. I knew it. They spread out slowly, methodically, blocking any escape route. Their rifles were in their hands, not quite pointed at me, but not exactly casual either. The body language was clear. This was over. The gray-haired one who'd first seen the creature step forward. He was the leader. I'd figured that out by now. The others deferred to him, looked to him for direction. He told me this was over, said I'd had my chance to do this the easy way. Now they were taking the creature, and I could either walk away or they'd make sure I didn't walk away at all. He said it calm as anything, like he was discussing the weather or telling me about his plans for dinner. There was no anger in his voice, no heat, just cold certainty. I looked at the small Bigfoot beside me. It was pressed against my leg, trembling, its eyes wide with terror. I'd dragged this creature through hell, trying to protect it. I'd given up everything, my supplies, my safety, probably my sanity, to keep it safe. And now it was going to be for nothing. They were going to take it, cage it, turn it into a spectacle. Probably kill it eventually through stress or mistreatment or just because they didn't know how to care for it properly. And there was nothing I could do to stop them. But I stepped in front of it anyway, putting myself between the creature and the guns. If they wanted it, they'd have to go through me. The gray-haired man sighed like I was being unreasonable, like I was the problem here. He raised his rifle, not quite aiming at me, but getting there. Said they'd make it look like an accident, a hunting accident. Happens all the time in these woods. Someone mistakes a person for a deer. Tragic, but these things happen. The other hunters were raising their weapons too now, spreading out more, finding positions that would give them clear shots. That's when the forest exploded. The sound that came out of the trees wasn't anything I'd ever heard before. A roar so deep and loud it felt like it shook the ground. Birds scattered from the canopy. The dogs started whimpering and pulling back on their leashes. Every person on that outcrop froze, eyes wide, looking toward the source of the sound. Then it came crashing through the underbrush, a Bigfoot, a full-grown, massive adult Bigfoot. It was at least 8 feet tall, probably taller. Its shoulders were broader than any human's, its arms thick with muscle, its entire body covered in reddish-brown fur that seemed to ripple as it moved. Its face was similar to the small ones, but larger, more pronounced, with eyes that blazed with intelligence and fury. My first thought was pure survival instinct. I dropped to my knees immediately and grabbed the small Bigfoot, placing it in front of me. My hands were up, palms out, the universal gesture for, I'm not a threat. I didn't know if this giant creature would understand, but I had to try. I locked eyes with it, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. I tried to communicate without words. I saved your child. I protected it. I'm not your enemy. The adult Bigfoot looked at me, then at the small one, then at the hunters. The hunters were fumbling with their weapons, shouting at each other. The gray-haired one was yelling to shoot it, but they were panicking, uncoordinated. The adult Bigfoot moved then, and it was shockingly fast for something so large. It covered the distance to the first hunter in maybe 2 strides. What happened next was over in less than 2 minutes, but it felt like it played out in slow motion. The adult Bigfoot swatted the first hunter aside like he weighed nothing. The man's rifle went flying, clattering across the rocks. He hit the ground hard and didn't get up. The second hunter managed to fire a shot, but his hands were shaking so bad it went wide, hitting a tree. The Bigfoot grabbed his rifle with one massive hand and bent the barrel like it was made of tin. Then it threw the ruined weapon aside and the hunter with it. The third hunter tried to run. He made it maybe 10 feet before the Bigfoot caught him by the collar of his jacket and lifted him off the ground. For a moment, he was just dangling there, kicking, terrified. Then the creature tossed him toward a tree. He hit it with a thud and slumped down. The fourth hunter, the one with the dogs, had released the leashes. The dogs were already long gone, disappeared into the forest. He stood there, frozen, as the adult Bigfoot turned its attention to him. But the Bigfoot didn't attack him. It just stood there, chest heaving, making a low rumbling sound that could have been a growl or could have been something else. Then it turned and looked at me. I was still on my knees, the small Bigfoot clutched against my chest. My whole body was shaking. The creature took a step toward us, and I forced myself not to move, not to run. This was it. This was where I found out if everything I'd done mattered. The adult Bigfoot stopped about 5 feet away from me. We stared at each other. Its eyes were dark and deep and filled with something I couldn't quite name. Not quite human, but not animal either. Something in between, something ancient and knowing. The small Bigfoot made a sound then, a happy, chirping vocalization, and pulled away from me, running toward the adult on wobbly legs. The big one caught it up in its arms immediately, holding it close, examining it with those huge hands. Checking for injuries, I realized, making sure its child was okay. The little one was chattering away, making all kinds of sounds, and the adult was responding with similar vocalizations. They were talking to each other, actually communicating. I stayed frozen, not daring to move, just watching this impossible reunion. Then the adult Bigfoot turned back to me. It looked at me for a long moment. Then it did something I'll never forget. It lowered its massive head in a slight bow. Just a little dip of the chin, but unmistakable. A gesture of acknowledgement, maybe even gratitude. I found myself bowing back, tears streaming down my face without me even realizing it. This creature understood. It knew what I'd done, what I'd risked. The Bigfoot made one more sound, not a roar this time, but something softer, almost gentle. Then it turned and walked toward the tree line, the small one still cradled in its arms. I watched them go. The adult moved with impossible grace despite its size, picking its way through the forest like it was navigating a familiar path. At the edge of the clearing, it paused and looked back at me one more time. Then they were gone, just vanished into the trees without a sound, leaving nothing behind but trampled undergrowth and the memory of something impossible. I sat there for a long time after they left, just trying to process everything that had happened. Around me, the hunters were starting to move, groaning, pulling themselves together. None of them looked seriously hurt, bruised, battered, probably with a few broken bones, but alive. The Bigfoot could have killed them easily, could have crushed skulls, snapped spines, but it hadn't. It had shown restraint, mercy even. That told me more about these creatures than anything else could have. Part of me wanted to just walk away, leave them there to deal with their injuries on their own. They'd tried to kill me after all, would have, if things had gone their way. But I couldn't do it. As angry as I was, as betrayed as I felt, I couldn't leave injured people in the wilderness. So I spent the next hour doing what I could for them. Basic first aid, making sure they could all walk, pointing them in the direction of the ranger station. Nobody talked much. They were all in shock, I think, maybe ashamed. The gray-haired one looked at me once like he wanted to say something, but he just shook his head and looked away. When I was satisfied they'd make it out okay, I gathered what little I had left, my knife, my water bottle, and headed in the opposite direction. I never looked back. It took me another day and a half to make it back to civilization. I was a mess, clothes torn, covered in bruises and cuts, running on pure stubbornness. When I finally reached my truck at the trailhead, I just sat in the driver's seat for an hour, unable to make myself turn the key. Everything that had happened felt like a dream or a nightmare. I kept expecting to wake up in my tent, realizing none of it had been real, but it was real. The bruises were real. The exhaustion was real. The memory of those dark, intelligent eyes was real. I drove home in a daze, checked into a cheap motel, and slept for 16 hours straight. When I woke up, I half convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing, that the stress and the cold water and the lack of sleep had made me hallucinate. But I knew better. Deep down, I knew what I'd seen. The hunters never reported what happened. I know because I obsessively checked, news sites and local reports for weeks afterward. Nothing. Not a whisper. I guess they couldn't figure out how to explain it without sounding insane. How do you tell people you tried to kidnap a baby Bigfoot and got your asses handed to you by its parent? How do you admit you were willing to kill a man over something you couldn't prove? So they stayed quiet, and so did I. For months, I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my family. Who would believe me anyway? A Bigfoot, a real, living, breathing Bigfoot that could bend rifle barrels and communicate with its young. It sounded ridiculous even to me, and I'd lived through it. So I kept it to myself, tried to go back to normal life, tried to pretend those 5 days in the mountains had never happened. But it did happen, and keeping it bottled up inside was killing me. So eventually I started talking, carefully testing the waters, telling the story to people who might be open to believing it. And you know what? More people believed than I expected. Some had their own stories, sightings, strange experiences, things they'd never told anyone because they thought they'd be laughed at. I've been back to the Appalachians a few times since then, different areas, always alone, always careful. I still hunt, still love the wilderness. But now I'm more aware, more attentive to the forest around me. I look for signs that most people would miss, strange footprints, broken branches arranged in patterns, the feeling of being watched. A few times I've found prints, big ones, bigger than any humans, pressed deep into mud or soft earth. Each time my heart starts racing and I follow them as far as I can. They always disappear eventually, onto hard ground or into water or just gone, like whatever made them knew I was following and decided to vanish. Once, about 6 months after the incident, I was camped in a different part of the mountains. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of something moving around my campsite, something big. I stayed in my tent, barely breathing, listening to heavy footsteps circling around me. Then everything went quiet. In the morning, I found a large stone placed carefully next to my tent. Just a stone, nothing special about it except that it definitely hadn't been there when I went to sleep. I like to think it was a message, a reminder that I'm being watched over, protected maybe. This experience taught me things I never expected to learn. About the world, about myself, about what's possible when we stop assuming we know everything. There are things in this world we don't understand. Things that exist in the spaces between what we think we know and what's actually true. And sometimes, if we're very lucky or very unlucky, we get to glimpse those things firsthand. It also taught me about doing the right thing even when it's hard, even when it costs you. I could have walked away from that river, could have let the small Bigfoot drown, could have handed it over to those hunters and avoided all the danger and pain that followed. But I didn't, and I'm glad I didn't, because some things are more important than safety or comfort or even survival, like protecting something helpless, like standing up for what's right even when nobody's watching. The hunters taught me something too, though not in the way they intended. They showed me how quickly people can lose their humanity when faced with something valuable. How greed and ambition can turn decent people into something ugly. How easy it is to justify terrible actions when you convince yourself the end justifies the means. I think about that sometimes, wonder if I'd have been different in their position. I hope not, but I can't be sure. People always ask me if I think there are more of them out there, more Bigfoot hiding in the wilderness, living their lives away from humans. And honestly, yes, I do. I think there are probably dozens, maybe hundreds, scattered across remote areas where people rarely go, living in family groups, raising their young, surviving in ways we don't understand. They've stayed hidden this long for a reason. They're smart, careful, they know to avoid us. And I think that's how it should stay. These creatures don't need to be discovered, don't need to be studied or documented or put in zoos. They need to be left alone. The wilderness is theirs as much as it's anyone's, more than ours, really. They were here first. They've earned their privacy. Sometimes people ask me for proof. Photos, recordings, physical evidence. I don't have any of that. Didn't even think to try to get it during those crazy 5 days. And you know what? I'm glad. Because proof would only bring more people like those hunters. More people who see these creatures as opportunities instead of living beings worthy of respect. The world doesn't need proof. The Bigfoot don't need to be proven. They just need to be left in peace. I'll never forget that small Bigfoot clinging to me in the river, trust in its eyes even though I was a complete stranger. I'll never forget the weight of it in my arms as I carried it through the forest, trying to keep it safe. And I'll definitely never forget that moment of connection with the adult, that bow, that acknowledgement between two completely different species that we understood each other. That experience changed me in ways I'm still discovering, made me more aware, more careful, more respectful of the natural world and the things in it we don't fully understand. I look at the wilderness differently now, not as a place to conquer or exploit, but as a home for creatures we share this planet with. Creatures that deserve to live their lives without interference from us. Do I regret jumping into that river? Not for a second. Would I do it again? Absolutely. Even knowing everything that would follow, the chase, the danger, the exhaustion, the terror, I'd still make the same choice. Because at the end of the day, I helped reunite a family, I saved a life, and I got to witness something most people will never see. Proof that we share this world with beings of intelligence and dignity that we're only just beginning to understand. The wilderness holds secrets, deep secrets, things that exist just beyond the edge of our understanding. Most people will go their whole lives without ever glimpsing those secrets. I was lucky or unlucky, depending on how you look at it. I got my glimpse, and it showed me that the world is stranger, more wonderful, and more mysterious than I ever imagined. So to anyone reading this, if you're out in the wild and you find something you don't understand, something that seems impossible, something that makes you question everything you thought you knew, protect it, respect it, let it live. Don't think about fame or money or proof. Just do the right thing. Because sometimes doing the right thing means standing between something precious and the people who would exploit it. Even if it cost you everything. I still hunt in the Appalachians, still love those mountains despite everything. But now I know I'm never truly alone out there. Something is watching, something old and wise and powerful. And somehow, knowing that makes me feel safer rather than scared, because I know that if I ever need help, if I'm ever in real danger, there might be something out there that remembers what I did, that remembers I tried to help one of their own. That's my story. That's what happened in those 5 days that were supposed to be a simple hunting trip. I saved a small Bigfoot from a rushing river, and in return, it and its family saved me. Not just from those hunters, but from a narrow view of the world, from thinking I understood everything, from believing that magic and mystery had been explained away. Believe it or don't, it doesn't matter to me. I know what I experienced, I know what I saw, and I know that somewhere in those mountains, a Bigfoot family is living their lives, safe and hidden, and that's exactly how it should be. For more interesting stories, check this out.